Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania finally comes out this week, and this is going to be my updated MCU ranking from worst to best. We're going to be ranking all of the Marvel films that have premiered in theaters. That is 31 films, so none of the Disney Plus stuff is included in here, none of the specials, none of the shows. We're just talking the movies today, and with this film being the 31st one in this entire lineup, I'm very excited to dive into that and share my thoughts on Quantumania. I do have a full non-spoiler review for this film on the channel right now, so you can definitely go check that out. But without further ado, let's dive into this ranking. And if you are new here, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button because we have tons of Marvel content coming up over the next couple of days, and I definitely want to get your guys' thoughts on that list. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. What do you want to see from me for Marvel content? What are you hoping I make? And of course, without further ado, let's get into it. And something I do need to mention is that this is my list, so if you do not agree with my list, that's completely fine. I have very hot takes at times when it comes down to my Marvel ranking, which is going to very much differ from a lot of you. I base my opinion on kind of rewatchability and certain things just kind of as a nostalgic fan of comic books and what I really love seeing in Marvel comics, as well as just little different things, but a lot of it does come down to rewatchability and what is really eagered to my cup of tea. So with that said, at my number 31 is Thor: The Dark World. This is the only MCU film I've seen less than 5 times. I do never care to rewatch this one. Anytime I come back around and do marathons, this is the one I either skip or just use it as my nap time. It's not a terrible made movie, and that's saying something. I don't think any of the MCU films are terrible. I don't even think any of the MCU films are bad. There's just decent ones, but this is like bottom of the barrel decency. And if we're talking about like what is closest to being a bad movie, it would be this one. This one lacks any of the fun and charm of the Thor world and really much loses a lot of different elements. There's some fun mythology in there, but specifically if you've ever read the comics for Thor and you see what they did with the Dark Elves in here, it is completely disappointing. This film could have been epic, and it was not. Now, my number 30 is Captain Marvel. Now, I'm really hoping this year that Captain Marvel 2 really blows it out of the park because I do love this character from the comics. I like what Brie Larson has given us, but this film, again, kind of like Thor, I've only seen it less than like 6 times. It's another one of those that I think everything in space should have been the most exciting element, but sadly was the most lackluster. And then everything on Earth was the most fun, specifically when she was partnered with Nick Fury himself, Samuel L. Jackson. I love their dynamic. I love their relationship. I love learning more about Captain Marvel, but really much the choice to have her not know who she is and trying to figure out herself throughout the entire film was definitely a hot choice to do, and I do not think was the correct way to do it. Again, this character is very powerful, so it is hard to center a movie around her. It's kind of like Superman, but there is a lot of stories that they could have pulled in from, and I really do think that this one itself feels more just setup of who this character is before going into Endgame, as well as setting up the Skrulls nonetheless. But with that said, I don't hate this movie, I just expected more. Number 29 is Iron Man 2. Now, this is one of those ones that I think has a lot of fun elements to it, but it very much is, in the grand scope of everything, just a setup movie for the entire Avengers film coming up soon, as well as establishing a little bit more about Tony Stark, the SHIELD initiative, and everything of that nature. Whiplash is terribly wasted in here. Justin Hammer is greatly played by Sam Rockwell, but there's not enough of him, and I'm just going to say this right now. Kevin Feige, you need to bring back Justin Hammer. Come on, man. Iron Man 2 does have some fun action sequences nonetheless, but this is still one of those that, again, it's just very forgettable. Number 28 is one that I know a lot of people love, and this is just one that every time I go back to watch it, I want to love it because it has every sprawling element that I should love, but I think it really just comes down to that I'm not the biggest fan of Kenneth Branagh as a director. Not saying that he's a bad director, but that film is Thor. I love the Shakespearean kind of story that he's using for Thor, and specifically in the tone that he's also established. I think the way that Asgard looks in this movie is probably visually the coolest thing that Asgard has ever looked in any of the Marvel films. Thor itself is such an okay movie for me in the grand spear of everything in the MCU film. It never blows my mind away. I do love the father-brother kind of son story that they're telling here between Loki, Thor, and Odin, but in the same, again, grand scheme of everything, this film makes the terrible choice of bringing him down to Earth, and I understand that was to humble Thor, to make him learn more about himself, and to kind of, again, humble himself to becoming the God of Thunder that we know he is, but I expected a little bit more from that, and I think that's my one thing, is that everything on Earth feels pretty wasted and honestly very lackluster. But everything in Asgard that they handle, I think, is brilliant. I don't think I'm a major fan of Kenneth Branagh as director. I did love his film Belfast, though. If you haven't seen that one is awesome. Number 27 is Captain America: The First Avenger. Now, when we get to this point, pretty much everything here and up, I pretty much enjoy. And it's just kind of some things here and there in the kind of the middle of the road stuff. And I find that this movie is actually quite underrated when people talk about this one. My biggest issue, and let me get this out of the way, is it's way too montagey in the back half. This is the one thing that actually kills this film for me, and I absolutely hate how, again, montagey it is in the back half. It really drags a lot of the pacing down, and I wish it was a little bit longer. I think this film needed that element to really develop more, develop Bucky more, develop Peggy Carter more. That is like the most important element of this entire MCU story that I actually do not think got all the development that it really needed, and it was centered on all in this movie. But with that said, I do love the World War II tone. I do love Chris Evans in this role. I love the suit that they use in here, specifically that like battled ward tired one, not the pajama looking one. That was stupid. But I love what they were able to do in here, and I love that they centered it around World War II. There is so many fun elements in here. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull's great casting. As an origin story, this is a great one, but at the same time, when you do look at this film again, on a film-made scale, it does hold back quite a bit because of how rushed it does feel at times. And it feels like they were just trying to churn out this film to really much get Captain America into the MCU. And at my number 26 is The Incredible Hulk. After rewatching this one, I just found this to be very underrated. I love the tone of this movie, and when this movie premiered, it came right after Iron Man, and it seems like the MCU is trying to figure out what tone they wanted to go with. Do we want to go more Iron Man route, or do we want to go more the Incredible Hulk route? And audiences turned out for more for Iron Man, so that is definitely the direction that they started to go in. Not a bad direction either, because it is a pretty damn great movie, but when you look at The Incredible Hulk, that movie has one of the coolest third acts I've ever seen in the MCU, specifically that fight scene between him and Abomination. I miss having central Hulk movies. I think there is a lot of cool elements you could do with the Hulk, and I understand there's a lot of rights issues and certain things with Universal, so hopefully one day we can get more of that. But this is my version of the Hulk that I really love, and I also did like Edward Norton in the role, even though I do still really love Mark Ruffalo as well. It just has a lot of cool sequences, and I like the kind of Frankenstein monster sort of tale that they're trying to tell throughout this one. My number 25 is Thor Ragnarok, which I know a lot of you guys are going to be like, seriously? This is not higher up on your list? No. I've mentioned it countless times. I said that I have hot takes of hot takes. Thor Ragnarok just is a fun movie to me. I think the humor gets in the way of this film almost in every single avenue. And I think Taika Waititi needed to have written the script for this one. This is the film that he did not write the script for, and I think it undermines a couple different sequences, specifically when it needs to be serious. Now, with that said, I do still think that this is a great story that once we get into Avengers Infinity War, this is great setup for that film, and specifically Thor's character arc and where we get to see him in Infinity War. That is the best part that this film really does, is getting us there. I also love Valkyrie. I think she is phenomenal in here. I think Tessa Thompson comes in and steals the show. Love seeing more of the Hulk. I love all the action set pieces. This is just one that every time I go back to rewatch it, I like it less and less. I have so much fun with it, but in the all's grand scheme of stuff, I just never have the thoughts to really want to rewatch this. Number 24, this is the movie that I think, and I wish it was in my top 10, but it's not. But what I will say is I still think this is one of my favorite directions in the MCU, and that is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Flat out, Sam Raimi, I think, has his style all over this movie. Nothing about his direction is actually any of my issues with this film. I think he has some of the best directing that we've seen in the MCU, specifically in the way that they were able to let a director show their style. This does have horror elements to it. It does have Evil Dead tendencies to it, which is like my favorite horror film of all time. So it was great to see Sam Raimi be able to do that. And specifically with the Doctor Strange movie, I think a lot of elements in here are awesome in the way that it explores the multiverse. I love Wanda. She's a very believable villain in the way that Elizabeth Olsen plays her. And honestly, I love the action sequences here as well, specifically when she's killing all the Illuminati, or when you look at Doctor Strange versus Doctor Strange and using the musical notes, the usage of that in the score, Danny Elfman's score, was fantastic. There are so many exciting elements in Multiverse of Madness that does make for a very fun time, but there's a lot of frustrating elements in this film where I do think this movie was too short. There's not that much development about Doctor Strange. He has the exact same character arc as when he started this movie. I needed more development between him and, of course, Rachel McAdams' character specifically, and when they do go to that other multiverse area, I think there was a nice little chunk there that was missing, and there's certain elements here and there that I do think definitely would have made the film a little bit more palatable, specifically about Scarlet Witch's character. A lot of the film just feels rushed. It's a fun rush of adrenaline, but that's where I really lose myself, and I wish we would have explored certain elements a little bit. My number 23 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. This movie is a ton of fun. I have no doubts about that. It's a great palate cleanser coming off of Avengers Infinity War, and it has all the fun capabilities of shrinking and getting larger, making other things large, and getting to see more of Giant Man, and of course getting introductions to Ghost, which is not the best film, but I do like her power set, and I'm interested to see, and I do like the performance, but this is a big central show out for the Wasp. In a lot of different ways, while the Ant-Man universe has always focused and featured on Scott Lang, this is the movie that starts to focus a little bit more on Angelina Lilly's character, the Wasp, and I love how badass she is in this. I love seeing her run on the knives. Again, so much fun in this movie, but at the same time, in the grand scheme of everything, it's not one of the ones that I are so eager to go back and rewatch. Every time I watch it, I'm like, this is a fun time. And at my number 22 is Avengers Age of Ultron. This is actually the one that I think gets way too much hate when it comes out into the MCU. People just shit on this one for no reason. Now, will I say Ultron definitely deserved a little bit better? Absolutely. I think Ultron is actually one of the coolest villains from the comics that honestly did not get a lot to do in this movie, but from what James Spader was given, I did like the voice. I love the look. I love a lot of the action set pieces in here. We get our introductions to Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, which was phenomenal. The thing that I love about this movie, though, is the way that it continues to build. We already have an Avengers team established. They've been working together, and now we get this opening mission that's just badass. We get a party with them actually just bantering and having fun, which is some of my favorite stuff in the comics, of when you just see the heroes communicating. And I love how this film does kind of strip back. It gives us more development to Hawkeye. It starts to build up that tension between Iron Man and Captain America. I think overall, while this is a movie that definitely has a lot of issues from Iron Man 2, where it's just trying to build up the future of the MCU, there's so much fun in here that it's hard to deny how great Age of Ultron can be at times. It just drags a bit, and specifically everything it's trying to set up. I think there's quite a few things in there that I would have just stripped away and just let it set up in its own film. I think that's one thing that the MCU kind of does fall apart at times with, but Age of Ultron, underrated. For 21, speaking of underrated, this movie also gets way too much hate, and that is Iron Man 3. I do not get the hate on this one. Every time I go back to rewatch this one, I purely enjoy it. I love Shane Black's direction in here, and while, again, in the grand scheme of everything, the when he destroys all of his suits kind of just wiped away right after and just goes into Avengers Age of Ultron, there's a lot of great things. It's actually one of my favorite performances by Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man in here. I like that it's more about Tony Stark and the man under the mask and the iron suit than just about Iron Man. He's more focusing on his smart skills and everything of that nature, and I think that's great. But the thing that does drag this film down, and you'll hear this a lot through a lot of these MCU films, is the villain. Killian is not a good villain. The Mandarin twist, while cool at first, and definitely works a little bit better now that we have Shang-Chi, at the time was definitely not the thing, and I still think that, God, Ben Kingsley would have been an amazing movie. I still really like this one, but again, a lot of people overly hate this film, and I think it's stupid. 20 is Black Widow. Again, another one that gets way too much hate. Now, I will never take away, though, from the ending. The ending of the film, I think it should have been more smaller scale. I think it is a little bit too big for what they were trying to do. Some of the CGI is honestly a mess, but Scarlett Johansson finally gets to come in as the villain as the hero and get her own solo film, and it's great. We get development on her, we get development on what she did in between Civil War, and as well as we get to learn more about her family and where she came from and get introduced to 3 new characters that are fantastic. Now, one thing I will mention, Taskmaster, very disappointing in this. Really interested to see how they bring him back in Thunderbolts, because I do need more of that character. Yelena, played by Florence Pugh, is one of the big all-star people of these brand new MCU phase. I'm obsessed with her character. I think she's fantastic. The Red Guardian, David Harbour, is awesome. I cannot love this guy enough. Cannot wait to see him in the Thunderbolts again. Rachel Weisz in this film as well. Fantastic. I need more of this whole entire family. I love the Black Widow family, and I just find this film to be great. I love the tone that they especially did in the first 2 acts as well. Number 19 now is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. This is the brand new Ant-Man film that is now out in theaters, and it really much hits in the middle of the road of my MCU ranking. And I don't think this movie is bad. It's just not great. It's not great. It's a good movie. It's a fine, good movie that I quite enjoyed. But after really thinking on the movie and seeing it a second time, I come out of it going, that was just a good movie. But I expected it to be great. And even on that rewatch, I expected more from it. There's so many exciting elements that could potentially have happened in this movie. And there's a lot of great stuff. Let me talk about my pros. First off, I love that Peyton Reed was still able to contain a fun Ant-Man movie in here. And that is the thing, it is fun. I love the buildup of Jonathan Majors as Kang. There's a lot specifically around this character that makes me very intrigued to see him in the future. While we already got an introduction of him in Loki, this is to see how ferocious one variant of Kang can possibly be. And it really much does set up, specifically in a lot of his dialogue, what could potentially be coming up next. If you've read the comics, you know exactly what those things are, and that is what's more frightening. And that is also what is very exciting. I love Jonathan Majors. I think he's stolen a majority of this film. Michelle Pfeiffer also gets a lot to do in this movie, and I was not expecting that. Paul Rudd and Cassie and their relationship, especially Catherine Newton taking over the role as Cassie, both of them really work in harmony, and I love them. Angelina Lilly doesn't really get a lot to do in here, but she is still a badass, and Michael Douglas as Hank Pym actually had some pretty stellar moments in here that it was great to see and put a smile on my face. But overall, as I watch this movie, it's part Star Wars, part Rick and Morty, part Ant-Man, part Thor Ragnarok, and all those kind of things shaken up into a bottle and made into a movie. And there's fun to be had. There's no doubt about that. I genuinely, the second they get sucked into the quantum realm, I was really into the world. By the midpoint of the film, I kind of found myself tiring out a bit because of so much exposition. They really much retread a lot of elements that if you've already seen Loki, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man, they're really much re-explaining the entire multiverse. But when they get into the exposition about Kang, I got excited because everything with Kang I thought was phenomenal. On my number 18 though, we have Avengers. Yes, the very first Avengers movie, which at the time, if you were asking me back at that time, this would be my number one. When we just had phase one, this is like at that point. But now we've had countless other Avengers movies, countless other big events. And in the grand scheme of everything, I find that the pacing for this movie is a little bit slow. But I will say this is one of the few movies where every act gets better and better. And it has probably, if I were to rank the best third acts of any Marvel film in the MCU, this would be top 5 easily. The third act of the Avengers is what you came for. To see this team finally coming together, put together, working together, and kicking some Chitarian ass. I love it. Seeing Captain America go Hulk, smash, and then him smashing the thing is just grand and awesome. I love seeing them work together. My comic book nerd was just going off. That summer, I saw this movie like twice a week, and I just had a blast with it. It really much formed a great relationship with one of my best friends now, and actually the best man at my wedding. And really much ever since then, we have seen every single Marvel movie together. So this is like it's very near and dear to my heart. But overall, when I go back to rewatch it, it doesn't hold up as too much for me because I'd rather just rewatch Avengers Infinity War Endgame at this point. Number 17 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I'm planning on actually doing a whole marathon of Guardians of the Galaxy films leading into the third one. So I have not watched this film in about 2 years, but every time I sit back and really think on this ranking, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, while I don't love how long they take to actually introduce the villain, I do kind of like that James Gunn took the risk of more meandering the characters to give them a lot of character development. And I do like kind of how they separated the characters for this movie in particular, because now that we've seen the Christmas special, as well as a lot of the trailers for 3, it looks like we're really bringing them all back to make them into their own. And I think this was a film that was needed to really develop each and every one of the characters. Drax and Mantis don't get too much to do in here, but when it comes down to Rocket, Groot, and Yondu, you come to love Yondu. I love the sister relationship between Nebula and Gamora. All of that is important, and specifically Star-Lord and his dad, because in the end of the day, this is Star-Lord's story. and I was quite impressed with what James Gunn was able to wrap up and weave within there. And overall, as a cosmic adventure, this one is a blast and a lot of fun, and the soundtrack's fantastic. At my number 16 now is Doctor Strange. I just have a soft spot for this one, and the way that Scott Derrickson directs this movie and really much brings to life this entire mystical world is absolutely phenomenal. The kaleidoscope aspects and the natures of those fight scenes are fantastic, and seeing the Ancient One kick ass Tilda Swinton, what a great choice. The other thing I will say, though, is I wish Mads Mikkelsen had a little bit more to do as the villain. I think that's the one thing that does hold this film being the all-time one of the best origin stories in the MCU, but I do love what Benedict Cumberbatch was given here, and I think as an origin story of establishing a new character, this one was a trip, and what a wild trip it was. We're getting into the middle of this list. I just want to remind you guys, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, comment down below your guys' thoughts. I definitely can't wait to hear all those down there. And with that said, at my number 15, we now have Captain America Civil War. I know a lot of you guys are probably going to have this one a lot higher on your list, and that's completely okay. I think the airport fight seems a lot of fun, but my personal favorite fight scene is the final one because the stakes, the emotion were all there. I found that the airport fight scene was more just for fun and didn't really have too many stakes to it all. I actually think a hero should have died probably in that moment to give this film a little bit more grand scope of seeing the Avengers break up. But that's just my opinion. If we're looking at just rewatchability, this is one of the most rewatchable MCU films because of how damn fun it is. And all the buildup from the first act all the way to the third one really comes to powerhouse. Chadwick Boseman does steal the entire movie, though, as the Black Panther, and I love Tom Holland's introduction as Spider-Man. There's so many different things to be very much impressed in here, and I was, honestly, again, I really like this. Speaking of Tom Holland, like I mentioned, at my number 14 is Spider-Man Homecoming. This is just a perfectly small, contained Spider-Man universe that I love diving in because it's just Spider-Man versus the Vulture and him trying to balance school and all of that. Now, this is very different than any other Spider-Man solo movie that we had gotten up to this point because Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire were kind of dealing with a different type of scenario. They went for a different type of origin story for Spider-Man Homecoming, and as we can see, the entire trilogy is pretty much his origin story into ending up to where the Peter Parker that we know from the comic books, and I love that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to No Way Home. But Homecoming, if you're just looking for a purely little film that doesn't have too many ramifications for the MCU, this is right then and there. It's John Hughes infused comedy and humor, absolutely makes me smile, and I really love this movie. And now my number 13 now is Ant-Man. This movie is so much fun, and honestly it'd probably be higher on my list if it was just more self-contained. I understand we need that Falcon scene to really much establish certain things going forward, specifically in Civil War. I can't help but think that this movie would be even better if it was just self-contained. I love the heist element. I love Paul Rudd in the role. He's so perfect as Scott Lang. Michael Douglas is a big, huge hit in here, as well as Hank Pym. Their relationship, the way that Angeline Lilly works in here, the way that he's just trying to be better and get a second chance at life is something that I truly can inspire to be. And really much this whole trilogy is all about second chances. Paul Rudd is perfectly casted in here. The shrinking down elements all work. I have no real big complaints with Ant-Man. This is just such a delight that I love revisiting. My number 12 is Spider-Man Far From Home. I will still contend. I think everything in here with Spider-Man versus Mysterio and all those certain sequences, specifically that midpoint sequence when we find out who Mysterio really is still top 3 MCU battles or sequences or anything. And then when it comes down to Spider-Man, that's probably my second favorite sequence out of them all. And I say that as someone who absolutely loves Mysterio. He is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, if not my favorite one. And the fact that Jake Gyllenhaal played him, who is one of my favorite actors in the MCU, says a lot. I love Jake Gyllenhaal's performance in here as Mysterio. I love Mysterio. I love the way that they use him. I do think his motivations are a little bit silly, specifically on rewatches, but I love the relationship that they start to build between Peter and MJ. There's so much stuff to really love in here and so much greatness in here that it just makes you smile, and it's just fun to see Spider-Man kind of out of his element, going to a different country to kind of just, again, be far from home. It really strips back, and as an epilogue to Endgame, I thought it was perfect. But speaking of perfect, let's talk about Iron Man. At my number 11 is the first film in the MCU, and that is Iron Man. This film is just perfect in the way that it came out and the way that it influenced blockbusters at that time, the way that it birthed the MCU and just created such an awesome entire thing to really cheer on for. Robert Downey Jr. was that character, was that person to bring it all to life. And Jon Favreau right then and there with the direction and everything of that nature just works. It's exciting, it's exhilarating, it's fun. I love the way that this film is paced, specifically in the beginning, seeing him having to build the suit and getting that and becoming conceptually like intrigued with building that and wanting to be a hero for the people. This all goes into his arcs all the way up until Endgame, and it is so vastly important that I just can't help but love this film on every single rewatch I go back and rewatch it on. My number 10 now is Eternals. Now, I understand that almost like I feel like I'm in the minority on this one, but I just freaking love the Eternals. Now, it's not a perfect movie by any chance. I think this is kind of a messy movie at times, specifically with certain things that they do with the deviants. I do not think were needed at all, and I do think the film might be a tad bit too long. Maybe this would have worked better as a Disney Plus series exploring each and every one of these characters in this time period, but with that said, with what Chloe Zhao was able to do, I think is so human and so simple that it simplifies everything and really much hones in kind of that DC mantra of gods with humans and gods wanting to become humans, and that's kind of what the Eternals characters are. Now, some of the characters I definitely think needed a little bit more development, but I honestly came to really appreciate each and every one of them for their own particular manners. But I did love Phastos, I did love Makari, and I absolutely love Druig. I think they are absolutely the big standouts of this entire film, and I want more of them. And also Thena and Gilgamesh, they were great too. I mean, this is a big, wide-spanning cast, and it's a group of characters that I'm interested to see how they are able to elevate and bring them into the MCU later on. But this is one of those movies that, while I've only rewatched it maybe 5 times at this point, it is one that every time I have seen it, I like more. I love this movie. I love these characters. I love the new stuff they introduced into the MCU. It is super different than anything else that we've seen in the MCU, specifically in the tone, but I love the action. I love the way it's framed, specifically in the way that Makari runs, and I love the relationship between a lot of these different characters, and I can't wait to see more of them in the future. My number 9, I think this will be my last hot take, I swear, but my number 9 is Thor Love and Thunder. I don't know what it is, man. I fucking love this movie. Every time I go back and rewatch this movie just like kicks it up a notch for me. And I'm just a massive fan of Taika Waititi, but for some reason Thor Ragnarok just does not work on my brain spectrum. Maybe I'm just an idiot. Call me an idiot, whatever. I know I am, but Thor Love and Thunder, there's something about this sweet sensibility. Maybe it's because I'm getting married next year. Maybe that sweet sensibility is in me. But I love the relationship that really formed between Thor and Jane Foster in here. And I love that Jane Foster is dealing with the cancer aspect and they're bringing that to life. And again, that is actually one of my favorite comic book runs, is this entire thing. So maybe I'm a little bit nostalgic for that, specifically with the gore stuff. There is definitely things that I wanted more in here. I wanted to see Gore God butch more people. I wanted to see him butcher more gods in a sense. And some of the stuff with Zeus, it does not hold up on rewatches, and the goats can get a little bit grating, but I love how wild this movie is. I love how stupid it is at times, and I love, at the same point in time though, the most important aspect for me in this film is the meaning of love and thunder, where that kind of goes. And what I love is that Taika Waititi, while there's a lot of humor throughout here, when it comes down to the dramatic points, I think he still lets those go. Whether it's the conversation between Thor and Jane Foster on the boat, and them having that conversation about her having cancer, or those final moments between them at the very end, specifically Thor and Gore making all their decisions, it's wonderful. For me, those are the elements that I think work the best in Thor Love and Thunder, and I was quite impressed with it. Now, my number 8 is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Now, this is kind of the big honoring tribute to Chadwick Boseman, and the more I think about this movie, the more that I just adore it. First off, Namor is absolutely incredible in here. I love the introduction to him into the MCU. He is easily one of the coolest characters that we've gotten introduced to in these brand new phases and in the multiverse saga. Cannot wait to see what they do with him next. Giving, of course, spoilers, Shuri the Black Panther suit, she is great in the role, and I love Letitia Wright in here. I think she gives a wonderful performance. Angela Bassett probably gives top 3 performances in the entire MCU. This is just a film that has a lot to deal with grief, time, and loss. And how do you move forward with all that? It is a beautiful send-off, a beautiful tribute, and a beautiful everything that you could possibly say when it comes down to honoring Chadwick Boseman's legacy as the Black Panther, and as well as honoring how important is the Black Panther to culture, the MCU, and all of society. I loved Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I think it is a bit messy. I think it is a little bit long. I think there is a couple things in here that is way too much in trying to connect certain things, but other than that, it's hard to deny how awesome this movie is. Speaking of awesome, at my number 7 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This is a character that I did not grow up with. I knew who Shang-Chi was, but I never read the comics too much into him. And then when the film was coming out, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like badass kung fu action. I love old school kung fu movies, watching with my dad, and Shang-Chi hit all the marks on those. I had a blast watching Shang-Chi and enjoying each and every one of the action set pieces in here, and specifically how they tie into each and every one of them, going more and more bigger and better than the last one. I was honestly blown away by how much Shang-Chi is really much able to elevate each and every one of the sequences, and specifically how it was able to bring to life the Mandarin in a way that worked as a father-son story. This has some of the best action in the MCU, it has some of the best new mythology, and it's easily one of the most rewatchable movies out of all the new films that have come out over Phase 4 and so far, of course, Phase 5. My number 6 is Avengers Infinity War. What else is there to say? I love how the Russo brothers broke up this film into different teams and forming these teams and bringing them together to all try and go up against and stop Thanos. This is just an adrenaline rush of a war. The second Thanos hits the screen and all the characters are starting to pair up, the action kicks off, and it is just memory after memory and jaw-dropping moment after jaw-dropping moment, seeing every character use their strongest abilities to try and stop one mad titan, at the same time of giving development to the same villain that we're all rooting against and understanding everything about him. This is a Thanos-level story between him and his daughter Gamora, and I love how they were able to develop that and center that. A very risky move, but it works in the grand scheme of everything, and specifically the way it builds up to Avengers Endgame, and Infinity War is just a breathtaking experience. At my number 5 now is Black Panther, the introduction to Wakanda in the MCU. Besides Civil War, this was the true introduction to it all, and it blew my mind because Black Panther was a character that I read about a lot, but more in the times that he kind of teamed up with everyone. I never really truly got into a lot of the Wakandan comics until after this movie, and I loved it. I love the technological aspects, the way that they made Wakanda work, the way that T'Challa plays Black Panther, the supporting characters all around him. Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, perfect casting. I want just more of this movie. I wanted this movie to be longer. I love every little bit of this movie, and specifically the score and the soundtrack, the way that it all weaves in perfectly within the story. Ryan Coogler was a genius with this. Number 4 now, of course, it's Avengers Endgame. What else is there? It's Avengers Endgame. It's the finale to the Infinity Saga, the thing that built up for years and years, and all of it works in every single way. I was completely and utterly blown away with Avengers Endgame the first time I saw it, and while certain things definitely make me roll my eyes at certain things and some coincidences, specifically the rat running over Ant-Man, I think they could have made something completely different than that to kind of bring him out of the quantum realm. But to say that is, I love how really much this film is broken up. I will say it each and every time. I love that the start's an epilogue. I love that the middle's kind of fixing this, and then the last third act is just this gigantic fight against Thanos and his army and all of our heroes coming together. Complete payoff of everything in the grand scheme that we had built up to this point. It is one of the most satisfying endings that we have ever seen in a Marvel film and overall just in a film in general. Now my number 3 is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Now I just got done rewatching this one a couple weeks ago. It was actually my final film that I watched in 2022, and what a great way to go out for that year. I love this movie. This movie is so exciting, specifically in the way that it handles the hand-to-hand action combat, intensity of all that. Captain America, Chris Evans, this is his big standout movie. Black Widow is a great character in here. I love the usage of Samuel L. Jackson, and as well as Anthony Mackie, is just a great standout and introduction to his character, the Falcon. Captain America in the MCU. And plus, of course, the Winter Soldier bringing him back, just awesome. This is a perfect movie. I had no complaints rewatching this one, and honestly, if you've watched this too, you probably feel Number 2 is Spider-Man No Way Home, and it's Spider-Man No Way Home. This is kind of the celebration of Spider-Man throughout the live-action movie era, whether it's Tobey, Andrew, and Tom Holland, and all the different villains that center around in there. I love the build-up and usage of the multiverse in here. I think it does get better and better as it continues to go on throughout the movie. It's fun, it's exhilarating, but the entire film really has a shift and change once that midpoint kicks in and Green Goblin, spoilers, ends up killing Aunt May, which then reflects and starts to open up. This is truly the end of Spider-Man's origin story. It took 3 films, but this was the end of it in exploring this character, and the way that they end this entire film with a fantastic third act, and I love everything we got in there. Some things I definitely would have liked a little bit more of, but that third act, the way it ends with everyone forgetting him, I really hope they keep that, and I hope he has to build back everything up in the next Spider-Man film, and they don't just reverse it or change it, because that is one of the most important things in this film that really definitively makes this film important to the entire MCU, and I love it. My number one, it's still my favorite MCU film, and that is Guardians of the Galaxy. It's going to be hard to beat this one. Every time I go back and think, oh, maybe this one could be there, I go back and rewatch Guardians of the Galaxy, and it instantly skyrockets back up there. James Gunn just didn't, he created my childhood. He brought to life the Guardians of the Galaxy into the MCU in such a grand scoping way. I never truly expected for this film to be completely amazing in the way that it needed to be, because I love the comics, but I'm like, are you really going to be able to translate that? And he did. Wonderful music, wonderful characters that you completely care about all the way through. I love each and every one of them, and the way that they're introduced in here. The humor is so smartly written throughout it, and as well as the exploration of the entire space opera sequences in the MCU is phenomenal. This was our introduction, our true introduction in a way to Thanos. Ronan the Accuser could have been better, but this is a film that really centers on its characters and its heroes and making some of the most likable douchebags in the entire universe and galaxy. I love Guardians of the Galaxy. Every single thing about this movie is perfect, and other than that, with that said, that is my MCU ranking. All 31 movies, including Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And let me know down below what your guys' thoughts are on this. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. And of course, until next time, stay classy.